Welcome to a special Corwin webinar for California school and district leaders. My name is Aaron Heintzman. I'm a senior professional learning advisor for Corwin, specializing in professional development solutions for California schools and districts. We are your partner in professional learning in that it is our privilege to work with some of the most respected authors, thought leaders, consultants, and experts in K-12 education, as well as some of the most innovative and passionate client schools and districts in the state. We thank you for taking time from your busy day to join our discussion of California's new expanded learning opportunity grant and how to leverage it to make investments in instruction and student learning. Let me advance this. Here, let me move it forward one. There we go. Before we get started, I wanted to briefly review some Zoom keeping reminders. Your mic and camera will be muted during this webinar. However, please do participate in today's discussion using the chat box down below. Tell us where you're from and one thing you'd like to learn from today's session. We will be answering questions during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. You can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function below, and we will answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. By joining this webinar, you agree to the Corwin and Zoom terms and conditions of registration. We will send a copy of the recording and the slides via email after today's session. Before we get to today's webinars, here's a quick reminder of some upcoming webinars that you won't want to miss. To sign up for free, go to corwin.com/webinars. If you can't make it to the live webinar, register anyways so you can get a copy of the recording and the slides via email. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our topic and presenters for today. California educators have been through one of the most challenging school years ever. We have now have a large infusion of funding from this. Oh, yeah, there you go. From the state to support our schools in navigating the next phase of the pandemic, which includes reopening and returning to in-person instruction in some form. But with great funding comes great responsibility to school boards, to our communities, to our staff, and to the state in the form of audit requirements, but for most of all, to our students. It is with this focus on student learning that I introduce our two presenters for today. Peter Birdsall is Executive Director of the Professional Learning Coalition, which consists of school districts and county offices of education across California. He was Executive Director of the California County Superintendent Educational Services Association for 9 years. Prior to joining CSESA, Peter was Executive Director of the California Institute for School Improvement and lead consultant for the Education Coalition. His experience in state education policy includes serving as a legislative advocate for numerous California school districts, county offices, and professional associations. In addition, he has held positions in state government, including serving as Chief of Staff for the program branch and Chief of Governmental Affairs for the California Department of Education. Welcome, Peter, and thanks you for joining us.
Thank you.
Our second presenter for the day is Doug Fisher. Doug Fisher is Professor and Chair of Educational Leadership at San Diego State University and a leader at Health Sciences High and Middle College in San Diego. He is a recognized expert in reading and literacy, teaching and learning, and curriculum design who consults nationally and internationally. His recent publications include books on simultaneous or hybrid learning, assessment in distance or blended environments, and the Distance Learning Playbook, a publisher's weekly #1 bestseller, all published by Corwin. Welcome, Doug, and thank you for joining us. Peter, let's start with you for an overview of the new Expanded Learning Opportunities Grant, its allowable uses and requirements, and then we will go to Doug to discuss some approaches for leveraging these funds for the benefits of our students.
Great. Thank you, Aaron, for the introduction. And we really appreciate being able to co-sponsor this Zoom meeting with Corwin. As you mentioned, the Professional Learning Coalition, it consists of school districts and county offices around the state that are focused on advocacy for professional development and professional learning. We have 4 key principles. One, obviously, the professional learning is important. Second is the state needs to provide support in terms of both funding and time. That such support should be formula driven, not competitive grants, and that districts need to be able to decide the providers to best meet their needs. So we're really excited about this grant program because it meets all 4 of those criteria. We're a strong supporter of the proposal as it went through the legislative and budget process. You'll see on this slide here, they'll be sent out later. You have my email address. More information is coming out all the time. We're expecting frequently asked questions to be posted by the Department of Education. So if people have additional questions later on, please email me and I'll be trying to provide the most current information. As I said, our presentation is going to be very much focused on the opportunities. There are some challenges, but overwhelmingly, I think it is a significant source of funding. It is formula based, so every district and a county office and charter school will be receiving this funding, and there's extraordinary local discretion. The challenges that we'll touch on briefly are plan fatigue, which we hear from people all around the state. I'll spend a little bit more time on the coordination with federal dollars, which is a challenge, but it's also just an extraordinary opportunity. There is a provision requiring a 10% set aside for paraprofessionals, so that requires some explanation. And then it's always good to go into these programs at the beginning, knowing what the audit requirements will be at the end. So we'll touch on all of those. The significant funding comment, $4.557 billion. You'll see there's a link here, which anybody on this call can go to find out how much their district will receive. The department has calculated those and posted those on this website. $4.5 billion is so big, it's hard to put in context. So the chair of our coalition is Deb Kubin, who's the superintendent of Ukiah Unified in Mendocino County. It's a district of a little bit less than 6,000 students. So to put in perspective, they're going to get $4.5 million, that school district, out of this program. So people can sort of start to calibrate what this means in terms of funding. The funding will be distributed 50% in May and then remaining 50% in August. So districts, counties will have it in their coffers soon. And it's available for expenditure through August 31st, 2022. So a little bit over a year and a half to expend this funding. I want to slow down a little bit on the local discretion because this is the opportunity part. The funding can be used for any of these identified purposes or any combination of these identified purposes. So extended learning time. There's a lot of discussion going on now about summer school, after school programs. Tutoring has got a lot of attention. Robert Slavin has written about that and others. I think a number of districts are looking at it as an option. For our coalition, a top priority is professional development. And specifically, it is referenced when you look at the bill language, professional development around accelerated learning, which I know will be a focus of Doug's comments and was a priority in the our advocacy and support of the bill. Integrated pupil support talks about mental health, food programs, etc. Staff training at the bottom, more focus on professional development. So that's social emotional learning, trauma-informed care, all of which I know are areas where Corwin has great consultants and authors that can be of assistance. I think the point is that districts have a lot of options in terms of how they think they can best serve their students and staff. There's an awful lot of flexibility in this list as you look at it in terms of use of these funds. Districts will articulate their plans for the use of this fund in a plan. And so one of the first sort of pushbacks we get is what I call plan fatigue. Governing board needs to adopt this plan by June 1st of 2021. So it's right around the corner. That's the reason for the relative urgency in putting together this Zoom call. But it's important to say this plan is not approved by anybody beyond the local governing board. So it again is one where, although people are so worn out. I know many people are on this call in their spring break. We appreciate that. But you have to write the plan, but it is basically working with your community, with your bargaining units, with parents, obviously with your board. But once you develop the plan, it's not approved by the county office or by the state. It is a locally developed plan. The law does require that you provide an opportunity for parents and school staff to be involved in the development of the plan. The state has developed a template. This is the link to that template. Basically comes straight out of the law. The law requires you describe how you're going to assess student needs, how you're going to inform parents of services, description of how you involve them in the development of the plan, a description of basically what this whole plan of supplemental instruction support looks like. And then we think a major, I don't know if it's task or opportunity, is coordinating it with, you have to describe how you're going to coordinate your plan with the federal funds. And then you will, in your plan, identify how you're using these funds across each of those purposes that were listed under local discretion of the plan requirements. So this issue of coordination with the federal funds is one of the key points I wanted to touch on, because the federal funds are so extraordinary right now. We're talking about ESSER, the Elementary and Secondary Education Emergency Relief Act. There's ESSER 1, 2, and 3. They're just different packages passed at different times. But they all have basically these constraints or guides or whatever you want to say on the use of the funding. You use ESSER funds for anything you can use ESSA funds, so Title I, Title II, Title III, IDA, Adult Ed, Perkins, McKinley-Vento. You can use it for anything you can sort of tie to responding to COVID, including distance learning, professional development. Another allowable unit is purpose is providing principals and other school leaders with resources necessary for their schools and activities to address the unique needs of students. So there's just an enormous amount of flexibility here, which would lead me to suggest that the way to approach this is not to look at each separate funding stream. What are we going to do with the Expanded Opportunities Learning Grant? What are we going to do with ESSER 2? But rather to view it as a package. And what are the most important things that you can do to support your students and your staff? And then with all respect to the business officials in your districts, then let them figure out how they charge those expenses against various programs, because each of those programs allows flexibility, but each has a little timing differences and the little bells and whistles. So I think it would be a mistake to work serially through each of those programs. It's better to look at it as a significant chunk of money over time to address student and staff needs. So by significant chunk of funding, the state dollars I described earlier, the $4.5 billion, is only 20% of all the money that's available. The federal government has now appropriated about $20 billion to California. So it's a total of $25 billion that's available for expenditure through September of 2023. So basically you're looking at a 2.5 year window for how to best use these one-time fundings. I referenced the one time because that's probably the main frustration I've heard as we've talked with school districts. That there's this one-time money and you don't want to hire people and then shut it all down in 2.5 years. Well, one thing that is ongoing capacity building for school district and county office is to strengthen the skills and preparation of your staff. So professional development seems like just a really smart investment with these funds, planning over the next 2.5 years. And those benefits will carry on beyond the expenditure deadline. The other is that if you think about the attrition that your district county office is likely to experience over the next 2.5 years, we certainly hear lots of stories now about school principals and teachers planning to retire after the experience of the last year. So you can add staff. We think you can reasonably think about adding staff, realizing that as attrition occurs, they can shift into permanent positions. So you actually can think in terms of billing stability into your LEA through September 2023. So we've tried to summarize these in the following table. Requires some explanation. I'm sorry for that, but we want to get on one page. So on the left-hand side, you have the expenditure deadline. The original state and federal commitment was called learning loss mitigation. Hopefully your CBOs have just about charged everything they can. Chief business officials just about charged everything they can against those. But you then have the expanded learning opportunities grant that we talked about earlier, plus the funding for the first round of federal dollars available through 2022. And then you have ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, which is $20 billion, the funding we're talking about, available through September 2023. So that's the reason I talked about a 2.5-year time window. And that's one of the reasons I recommend that you think of it as one big package. You shouldn't think about, really our recommendations, you don't think about expanded learning opportunity and it's going to stop in August of 2022, because there's enormous overlap between what's allowed under that program and what's allowed under ESSER. So you in fact can continue to fund those activities through September 2023. You see in the next column, the dollar amounts, those are all in billions, as indicated, it's a significant amount. And on the right-hand side is all these can be used to remediate, deal with issues raised by COVID. LLM means they can be used for learning loss mitigation. And then, which is, as I've indicated from the list earlier, that's a broad definition of activities. And then FED is a reference to that language that says you can use it for the purposes of ESSA or Perkins or Adult Ed or McKinley-Vento, which adds additional flexibility. So that's sort of a quick cheat sheet, if you will, on these resources and the fact that there's a lot of overlap. Sorry. So there is, with regard to the state program, the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, the requirement that a district or county must spend at least, or a charter school must spend at least 10% of the apportionment to hire paraprofessionals to provide supplemental instruction and support. This is an area where we've heard a lot of frustration from district leaders, education leaders. And we did, in fact, oppose that in the legislature, just felt like it was legislative overreach. It was, in fact, obviously part of the political compromise. First of all, to put it in perspective, the case I gave you of Ukiah, they're getting $4.3 million, so 10% is $430,000. So between now and September 2022, they need to spend $430,000 on paraprofessionals. If they don't spend it, they give the money back. So it doesn't impact any of the other funding. I would recommend you think of it as like a separate categorical program. The definition of paraprofessionals are classified employees working in the direction of certificated staff person, provide English language arts, writing, or mathematics instruction. So we're not talking about custodians or bus drivers. We're talking about instructional aides. One of the most popular credentialing programs in the state has been the classified teacher credentialing program, where districts create a pipeline for instructional aides to become teachers. So again, looking at the opportunity here, I would think trying to hire people and support them to get their credential would be something that would benefit almost any district or county in the state. There is no separate approval of this, so it's something that basically you'll be discussing with your board and your community, and obviously your classified bargaining unit. But I would recommend, contrary to everything else I said in this presentation, this is what I would view separately as its own small categorical. 10%, that's what, $450 million out of $25 billion. The last thing is the audit requirements. The law, as you know, districts are required by law to hire an independent auditor to review how they spend funding. The state develops a guidance for school districts on how that audit will be conducted. And this law says that part of that audit guide will be, did the districts comply with the 10% requirement for paraprofessionals? And if you don't, the penalty is you give back the difference. So if you use 5%, then you spent that 5, the remaining 5 you give back. If you don't spend any of it, you give back the full 10%. It really rides entirely independently from the rest of the program. There is a requirement that at least 85% of the state program is spent on in-person instruction. So this is a place where your CBOs will have to be careful that if you're doing, for example, distance learning tutoring, you may want to fund a lot of that with federal funds. So it is, I think, very manageable. There's a lot of flexibility in the funding, but you just need to be aware of it. What the law says, if you spend less than 85%, then whatever percent you fell below 85%, then you give it back to the state. So if you spent 80%, then you give back that difference, 5% to the state. But I think CBOs will be able to avoid that. It does say you have to adopt the plan by June 1st. There is no penalty in the law if you don't, but everybody will be watching. You can revise the plan later on. So my advice is you do everything you can to adopt that plan by June. Again, it only requires your governing board's approval. And then finally, the most draconian one is it says that you have to submit an expenditure report by December 1, 2022. And if you fail to do that, you forfeit all the funds. Frankly, I've never seen such an extraordinary penalty. So that's a long ways away. That's on your CBO. Obviously, we're all going to make sure everybody submits the report. Really has almost nothing to do with how you best use those funds. So, hopefully the message was pretty clear from our perspective. You look at these funds as one major funding source available over 2.5 years. The question is how best to use those. And I can't think of a better partner for that discussion than Doug Fisher from Corwin. So, Aaron, I don't know if you want to open up for some questions.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Peter. That was a lot of great information. Yeah, let's hit pause here for a brief Q&A opportunity. I think I see some folks had some questions in the chat. If you'd like to submit any as a question, you can use the Q&A function as well at the bottom of your screen. Let's see if I know some folks were kind of answering as we go. From Connie. Actually, let's go to Edith. She wrote, are you use a paraprofessional limited to providing math and ELA support only?
The way the law is written, I would have to say yes. We'll see if there more flexibility is built in later as the state develops the frequently asked questions and regulations. But what the law says is, I can read the exact sentence, is a person who assists classroom teachers or other certificated personnel in instructing reading, writing, and mathematics. So that's what the phrasing is in the law. So okay. Yes, that's a long way of saying yes, it is restricted.
Thanks, Peter. Paul asked in the Q&A, can you use the paraprofessional funds to pay for current staff?
All of these funds are intended to be supplemental. So technically the answer is no. Again, I think CBOs are, there are a lot of ways to count for money. So I think an important test will be, I've already heard from districts up and down the state where their classified bargaining unit has reached out to the district leadership about how they're going to use this money. So part of it is how you, approach that agreement. But the literal answer, you don't want to be so bold as just take somebody that you're paying with the current money and then swap in this funding. I would indicate, however, that the federal funding, which is pretty extraordinary, does not have a supplement, not supplant provision. So there's enormous flexibility on the federal side.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, let's keep having the questions coming in the Q&A. And as we finish up the presentation today, we'll have time to answer some of those questions. But now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Doug Fisher to talk about what this grant could mean for student learning.
Great, thanks. So I'll start off with this thought that I have over the last few months. I think distance learning has had a destabilizing effect on some or many teachers. Their beliefs may not be the same as they were a year and a month ago. I think the vast majority of teachers had this in their mind pre-pandemic. They had high levels of teacher agency. They believed when they put forth effort, good things were happening for their students. Teacher agency is related to job satisfaction. When agency decreases, when I don't see a relationship between my effort and the impact I expect, my agency decreases, my demoralization increases, and eventually I burn out. And that's where we are right now in a lot of places. Teachers are saying nothing's working. They don't have this in their mind anymore. Instead, they say things like, I'm drowning, it's spinning, it's out of control, I can't do it. Nothing I do really matters anymore. So I want to make an argument that for some of these funds, we don't need to apply them only to direct services to students, more tutoring, more summer school. I'll get there. The research on teacher agency has three major components. And the first is collaboration. When teachers have time to tell their stories and discuss their practices, agency goes back up. Their effort increases and thus their impact increases. So how could we use some of this fund to build better collaboration opportunities for teachers? Could we be creative in figuring out ways to build collaboration, to really to invest in professional learning communities, for example, to build better opportunities for teacher share sessions? Because when teachers have chances to tell their stories and discuss their practices, it rebuilds agency. And teachers who have high levels of agency get better outcomes for students. We know that. And as Peter alluded to, there's a lot of people who are surveying teachers right now, including NEA, one of the unions. An NEA member survey says that 28% of teachers will not return this year. If we lose 28% of the teachers in the state of California, where would we get the replacements? How many people would we need to hire out of field emergency if we don't keep the people we have? The second thing that shapes and reshapes teacher agency is feedback. I did not say evaluation, feedback. Where are the peer coaches? This is an opportunity to use funds to hire coaches to support teachers as we return to in-person schooling. Don't discount that ongoing coaching as a way to provide teachers feedback, improve their instructional practices, design some professional learning or co-learning together, and actually impact student learning. I think mostly what we're hearing is, let's get some tutoring, let's get some summer school. But let's be a little bit more innovative than that. Some districts have been wanting to have peer coaches available for a long time. We have a 2.5-year window, as Peter said. What if we use this time to really grow the teacher expertise through some really powerful coaching? And in doing so, we save the people we already have, and we build their agency and their sense of accomplishment. The third is around success. Knowing you had an impact builds your agency. I had a conversation with one district, and they're asking if, can we use this fund to hire an additional vice principal? It seems reasonable to say yes, that would be something we could do with all of this money, is have another vice principal who could spend more time helping teachers see their successes, who could have more time for restorative practices, who could have more time for the services that we all know, the plan fatigue, the design, the supervision, all that stuff. And what if, as a result of hiring another administrator, teachers actually got honest, growth-producing feedback and knew that they were having an impact? So let's not limit the conversation to direct services to students. Let's look at indirect services that also impact learning. Can we build better collaboration opportunities for teacher? Can we build some peer coaching? Can we have some administrators have actual time? There are reports of teachers who have not had honest evaluations in several years because the administrators are simply too busy. And that is all destroying teacher agency. So I leave that to you to think about. How could we use some of these funds to accomplish some of our long-term aims that we've been trying to realize for a long time? What if we focused on the power of small wins, and we got the coaches and the leaders and the collaboration, and we started to rebuild that teacher agency, started to keep people in the roles that they have and feeling really good about their roles and not wanting to quit? Then some of the other things, the direct services, would be provided by people who have histories in our districts, rather than spending our time trying to hire all kinds of new people to backfill the positions because everybody left. I do want to comment on summer school. Summer school is, quote, a fail. Summer school has no better learning. I mean, you get 6 weeks of extra time, and it has virtually no influence on whether or not kids learn. Why is it that summer school, 6 extra weeks of time to learn, has virtually no influence on learning? It's no better than letting the kid grow up for a year. No teacher effect here. And when you read the research on summer school, and it surprises some people, it's because the focus is on remediation. And when we move to remediation, we see slowing down and isolated skills and somewhat boring lessons. And students believe they are being punished because they have to go to summer school. And if you show up not wanting to be there, not thinking you're going to learn and feeling punished, you are immune to so much of the instruction that's provided. So if we think about that, Aaron, you're going to have to mute because I'm getting feedback. Sorry, I can't do it for you. If we really think about that, how could we do better services for summer school? What if instead of I'm a drill and kill teacher and I only do the skills for summer that kids are missing, what if we built an enrichment program in the summer? What if we had a writer's camp? What if we had a science camp? What if we had all kinds of enrichment opportunities where lots of students came to summer rather than a remediation where students perceived it to be punishment? And what if, as part of an agreement for summer school, teachers got 1 hour of professional learning each day that they could try out with the students they're having in summer school classes? And what if we did job-embedded professional development for the entire summer, where we designed learning experiences based on the priorities in the district and really operationalized and really implemented and got people practicing on the same day they learned? And if we had coaches to add to that, imagine an hour of professional learning, opportunity to practice, feedback from someone who knows a lot about teaching and learning. Could we actually change practices while providing services to students? Now, tutoring has a strong effect. Tutoring works. Volunteer tutors work, peer tutors work. Tutoring has a strong effect if the tutors know what the learning target is. That means we have some assessment information to know what the kid needs to learn. If the tutors develop good relationships with the learners. To paraphrase Rita Pearson, young people don't learn from old people they don't like. That's the same with tutors. So we have to help our tutors understand, how do you develop relationships with young people? There was a study done, 100 years of intervention research. The number one finding after 100 years of studies on intervention, specifically in reading, was the number one factor that made the intervention work was the relationship between the adult and the student. So if tutors are providing these interventions, they have to work on relationships. And the third thing in the tutoring research, are the tutors actually getting the students to practice? Because sometimes we see the tutors doing the work for the kid. It's not a homework help. Here's what we're learning. We have a great relationship, and I'm getting you to do the practice. You are actually engaged in deliberate practice under my eye, under my watch, but I'm not trying to introduce new content to you. The tutoring is about, here's the learning target, we have a great relationship, and I'm helping you practice. And when you make errors or mistakes or have misconceptions, I don't tell you the answer, I help you figure it out. I guide you along the way. If we could train the tutors to do that, we will get that effect size, that very high effect size. So where am I at in my thinking? How do we add, whether it's leaders or coaches, to support the teachers in really good practices? How do we design a summer program this year and next year that looks very different than what we've done in the past as a remediation program? And if we're going to hire tutors, do we actually support the tutors to do the things that are in the evidence base that says, here's what makes tutoring programs, volunteer and otherwise, work? But my big message is we have to change the narrative from learning loss. There's all this talk about the COVID slide, the gap year, the learning loss. And as soon as that becomes the narrative, we lower our expectations for students. As you know, in our state, there's a big discussion going on about what standards should be prioritized next year and which standards should we throw out. And there's a lot of pushback on that. How do we make sure we don't say students are going to learn less this coming year than they did 2 years ago? How do we focus on acceleration? And when you look at the research on acceleration, it has some of these points. Can you identify skills that have yet to be learned? This is a really important one. What tools do you have to assess students? Make sure you have good assessment tools. That's part of the legislation, and it's there for a really good reason. We have to know what kids still need to learn. What is the unfinished learning or unrealized potential that they've had? And how do we know? And when you look at the evidence on instructional minutes, on average, 40% of instructional minutes are spent on things students already know. We do not have time to spend 40% of our minutes on things kids already know. You look back to the research, on average, 9 to 13% of instructional minutes, students are waiting for something to happen. So if you have 40% of the minutes on things they already know, and another 10 on average of time they're waiting, 50% of the instructional minutes are not related to the learning students need to do. So if we have really good assessment information, this is what you need to learn. And we design lessons that way. Second point in acceleration. How do you provide key aspects of knowledge in advance of the instruction? We have learned so much about technology. Can we provide interactive videos? Can we provide learning management systems that get students to engage with background knowledge, vocabulary, concept development before they're in the instructional event with their teacher? Third part, how do we increase the relevance that students have? Is it cultural competence? How do we make sure students are seeing it as relevant learning? Are we making sure that the tests and the tasks that they're doing are relevant to them, that help them develop their identity and their criticality? And next, rather than slowing things down, how do we create active, fast-paced learning experiences that cycle back through? Rather than 4 weeks on a skill, how do we cycle through them in a faster way? And the last part of the acceleration research says we have to work on students' confidence, not just their competence or skills. So let's invest in some social and emotional development of our young people and help them rebuild this confidence, help them rebuild this sense of self. My argument around teacher agency is the same for principal agency and student agency. By and large, people do not believe right now that their efforts are resulting in things that matter. And that goes for our students as well. So how do we rebuild their confidence? How do we reset their norms? The way I say it right now, what are you willing to do to help the students in your system reestablish their relationship with learning? Because a lot of our students have a fractured relationship with learning. So what are we willing to do to build that confidence so students have a strong relationship with learning? That's acceleration rather than remediation. Last thing I'll say, there's actually research pre-COVID on credit recovery programs and the components that are necessary. If you have high schoolers who need credit recovery, there are actually inventories of evidence-based decisions that you make around credit recovery. And one of these is 20,000 course takers, 4 years, 46 high schools. That's the first study. There's evidence that we can use to design credit recovery programs for students. Again, we'll pause for some questions, comments. Aaron, what do you see?
Thank you, Doug. That was incredibly valuable insight. Going to the Q&A, Connie, she has a question. We provided on-campus learning since September 2020. To do that, we hired paraprofessionals. can we apply these paras, or do we need to hire additional paraprofessionals to meet this requirement?
Well, the intent is that new paraprofessionals be hired, additional paraprofessionals be hired. So that's the intent. The reality is, staffing changes all the time in schools. It's really hard to track that. So if necessary, I think your CBOs, on the margin can, probably charge some of the dollars appropriately. But my sense is the bargaining units are going to be watching this carefully. There is, again, to put it in perspective, $25 billion statewide. 400 million of it is, required use for paraprofessionals. So, I think people are going to be hard pressed if they try to backfill positions that are already funded. Sounds probably with the federal funds or the state funds were made available earlier for COVID. So I don't want to say it's impossible, but I think it is inconsistent with the intent of the law.
Thank you. And actually kind of had a follow up with that, since I want to clarify that these paras was hired specifically because of COVID. I don't feel that this is supplanting. Is it if we apply the expense to this grant for the upcoming school year? Thank you.
Well, first of all, if so I'm assuming that the paraprofessionals that are hired were devoted to instruction. So that's, assuming that's the case, it sounds like you'd be supplanting. Again, I don't know that the audit, individuals change within schools. People leave and new people come in, so you can't track the individual. I say it's new positions, so they're, I don't want to be overly bureaucratic about it. But having said that, I think the general attitude of the classified unions around the state, bargaining units, and the state as it looks at it, is there is a lot of funding to pay for the COVID related relief, and this is an additional staffing. That's what it says the intent is to hire additional staff to provide this support. And I was trying to suggest one approach is to hire, I don't know if you have in other classrooms, but hire those staff that you think you can start building a pipeline so you have teachers in the future. So this is a point of frustration. Again, we opposed it in the bill. It is overreach. It is a little bit frustrating that there are so many questions on this specific, when the broader picture is how do you use, in my opinion, how to use these funds most effectively in a 2.5-year window. The clear intent is these are supplemental new additional hires for instructional purposes.
Peter, when there was one of the laws that was retro to last March, right? One of the funding sources was retro to last March, right?
Yeah, you can actually charge some of these funds back to March, yes.
So I'm listening my logic, not a CBO. My logic is, hey, if these people weren't charged to another source and they were hired for COVID, I can go back to last March. We wouldn't go past this current fiscal year. But if this fund is retro and I hire these people and they weren't charged to Title I, they weren't charged to this, they weren't charged to COVID relief, any of that, and this funding stream allows retro, it seems like that's a reasonable expense.
So are you talking about March of 2021 or March of 2020?
Wasn't it one of the funding streams? We had a webinar and it said it's retro to March 20 when COVID started.
Yeah, so those are federal funds.
Federal, so you could use the federal funds.
There's not this constraint on the federal funds. So
right.
Yeah.
Because those go retro to last March. So those paraprofessionals could be charged to that funding stream.
Right. Yeah. And there was some separate state money, the learning loss mitigation money that was approved also last year.
Right.
A question from Roberta. The problem is these are one-time funds, and it's not prudent to hire staff who will need to fund from our general fund.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
But there's going to be some attrition, right? So what if we overhire now and then allow some attrition? There's always a risk that there won't be attrition and then there's some budget problems 2.5 years from now. Or you give the money back.
Yeah, that's that's probably the major concern I hear from school districts is the one-time nature of this.
Yeah.
That's obviously we come into this believing that professional learning is a really good investment. I think Doug made a great case of that, of building agency. So, I think that should be a top priority. That's an ongoing benefit beyond the one time. I think if you can make an estimate of the attrition, you can build a stable workforce. And then there's so much money. I think there is going to be some of this cliff effect, and either you won't spend it or you're going to have to shut it down. But on the other hand, there's a desperate concern statewide about students that have been basically lost to the system or weren't engaged or disconnected from learning. So, I think there is again, if you look at it as a 2.5 year window, 2.5 years is one time, but at least it's not 6 months or 9 months. It's 2.5 years.
Thank you, Peter and Doug. On our current slide, that's my contact information. If we have additional questions that come up, outside of our time today, please just reach out. We'll be happy to, and I'll be happy to answer those questions. Doug, could you move the slide forward, please? Thank you. Yeah, and again, Doug, Peter and Doug, thank you for sharing all your insights and expertise with us today. For more information about the strategies that we discussed today, including the resources from Doug Fisher or Nancy Fry, please visit corwin.com. We offer a wide range of evidence-based professional books, workshops, and virtual institutes to support your staff as we navigate hybrid learning and the return to in-person instruction. We welcome you to learn more. You can also dive into our offerings in specific areas aligned to California and federal funding by visiting our California funding information site. Here you'll find recommendations for topics such as SEL, accelerating learning, hybrid learning, equity, trauma-informed practices, and literacy. Visit corwin.com/CA funding to learn more. It's a great page. Again, well, this brings us to the end of our session. We really appreciate your taking your time today. Everybody's really busy right now. We also want to thank our presenters, Peter Birdsall and Doug Fisher. If you have any further questions or would like to discuss your school or district specific goals and plans for driving student achievement, both for this summer and the long term, we'd be happy to schedule a time for us to connect. If you need to reach me, again, there's my information. On this slide, we will be sending this slide deck out along with the link to this webinar. So you can get that information there as well. And I think maybe Charlene was going to put it in the chat as well, potentially. Thank you. On behalf of Corwin, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.